From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. Here's what's ahead. K-State's Ajay Sharda will be with us to look at precision cropping data management and all the talk of late about what data service providers have to offer to the agricultural producer. Then 2 featured speakers at a recent Rangeland Carbon Storage Workshop held here in Manhattan. From the NRCS, Joel Brown, and from the USDA's Agricultural Research Service, Justin Derner, will talk about grazing management approaches for greater carbon retention in rangeland and pasture soils. Later on, K-State's Charlie Lee, reporting on a study of hazing practices for warding coyotes away from areas occupied by people. All this and more next on Agriculture Today. Agricultural producers, landowners, and creditors, you have a partner in your legal and financial needs. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services offers reliable, trusted information and guidance. Whether you need advice for ag credit concerns or are transitioning your operation to the next owner, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services can assist you in making sound decisions for your business. To learn more, call 800-321-3276 or visit us online. This is the K-State Radio Network and Agriculture Today. Thanks for being along with us. We want to share more thoughts from the area of precision agricultural technology with you for, as mentioned in previous broadcasts, there have been a score of meetings with experts attending each of these at various locations around the Midwest of late, talking over what's going on in this broad and intriguing field of precision technology. One of those meetings was recently here near Manhattan, the Kansas Agricultural Technologies Conference, co-hosted by K-State Research and Extension. Our guest now was in attendance there, and he's been at other meetings as well. Ajay Sharda is a precision agricultural engineer with K-State Research and Extension. Ajay, you tell us that there are a couple of things that seem to be high-profile areas of discussion under this big umbrella, precision agricultural technology. And one of them is data service providers and managing all that data.
Great topic of interest for a lot of people. On our machines these days, we are generating a lot of machine-generated data. How we planted, what we planted, and what rate, what speed, where were we doing those things. Same thing with combine and spray and so on and so forth. Not only these machines, we are collecting a lot more data from our fields, whether it's just soil, terrain, nutrient capabilities, and all that stuff. We are adding more aspects of weather on top of it. And we have a lot of other things going on. People are interested in satellite imagery. People are interested in, unmanned aerial systems and all that. So what we mean is that for a single farm, we could have anywhere between 5, 10, 15, 20 different data layers. And for a farmer like me, if I want to really understand what's going on, I need some help. Some support from some of the subject matter specialists, whether they're agronomists or some people who can understand remote sensing better, or some people who understand the machine aspect better. And then I can be part of that conversation, telling what my field is all about and what's the history and all that, so that we can all sit down and make a more informed decision regarding that.
How to manage that mass of data, though, and make it mean something. Is that still the primary question here?
Absolutely. We are down a couple of decades in terms of when we started talking about data handling and data analytics and all that. We are still dealing with the same thing. There are a lot of companies who are in the arena of providing data services. Basically, they get access to all your data. They manage your data to some extent. They provide you services like prescription maps or rate decisions or hybrid decisions or seed and all that. And then they keep all that data on your behalf on their site, whether it is on their site within the company or within the cloud, wherever that storage is. And they give you in-season and beyond services in terms of what to do. Basically, what we're talking about, how to efficiently manage your crop inputs and maximize on the profit aspect of it.
So we've multiple vendors out there, obviously, providing these various layers of data services. As far as a shopper's guide, if you will, that you'd offer to producers as they go about choosing a data service or a collection of services that will suit their needs, what things should they be thinking about, AJ?
Well, you ask a very, very good question, and I wish I could answer that question, because the irony in terms of why we are here lies in the answer of this specific question itself. Because, and I would like to bring an example of one of the presentations which was given during the 2020 Kansas Agricultural Technology Conference, where a farmer from central Kansas, he has been using technology on his farm for a long time. He collects data rigorously. He makes every effort to make sure every data layer has a name and an address in terms of where it came and what happened during that data layer. And I was really intrigued in terms of how many different softwares they use, how many different processes they have to go through to either clean up the data or get to a point where that data can provide some meaningful insight in terms of decisions. So there are many people and many, like you said, companies have sprung up who are giving different services in different formats. But as you know, and we all know, that all those different layers of information has to come together at a common portal where I can relate everything to the soil, to my yield, and my fertility, to weather, to remote sensing, to make that decision. And I think the problem lies there, how to get all those data layers at a common platform. That's probably somewhat doable, but how to make them useful? How can we access those selective layers? Which layers should we select? How to conduct those and the analysis on that and get meaningful decision out of it. I think a lot of people are asking this question now, how to get to a decision aspect.
And as of the here and now, it sounds as if it's a trial and error process for each individual because their data clearly differs from the other farmer down the road.
Absolutely. It's there are companies who are going to be providing a common portal where they say that there are AI-based engines and solutions and aspect on all that. There are a lot of agronomic people who are behind the scene providing a lot of insights. But I'm just talking about my own opinion, that every farm is going to be different. That farm is going to be, the soil fertility on that farm is different, the terrain is different, the amount of erosion or runoff which has happened during that season because of that rain is going to be different. And then all those aspects of sunlight and, so to say that one solution will fit to a lot of farmers is going to be very difficult. It could be that there is a broader arrangement of the way we start to get to the solution, but then it has to be a specific solution for every farmer.
That means this will be a discussion topic for years upon years, without a doubt.
Absolutely.
AJ, let's pick up on the other topic we wanted to take up, and that is autonomous systems for field cropping. Spoke a bit about the economics of these with your colleague Terry Griffin of K-State last week. More to the functional aspect of these systems and what's really applicable out there in Kansas cropping scenarios.
So applicability is probably a little bit down the road in time. Right now, there are more and more people who are ready to listen about autonomous systems. And from the academic purposes and even industry, we can take all the industry which is out there, Deere and CNH and in Kubota, we heard a news about them as, bringing an autonomous vehicle, a couple of weeks ago. So everybody's trying to bring a vehicle around it. But this is, again, coming from my opinion aspect is that we need to have functional systems around it. If we want to raise crops and have a food production system, one thing is we need to have those autonomous vehicles, which can navigate spaces and crop rows, efficiently without damaging those crops in a manner which is representative or parallel to what these current systems are doing. But more importantly, we will be missing a very important piece on them, which is humans. Who can see, who can sense, who has lots and lots of years of experience. They can think as they are looking at it, thinking evolves and all that. But on those systems, if you want to gather any piece of data or any piece of information, I have to have a very specific sensor to collect that piece of information. That data has to be logged and put in a format which is common to all other autonomous systems, in the functional space. And then obviously, I have to have a mechanism to, most importantly, get that data to somewhere it can be analyzed for someone to see what's going on. And I think this will be one of the biggest challenges in terms of how to get that abundance of data out of the field to some place. We can be talking about edge computing, we can be talking about cloud computing, but we need mechanism to get that data somewhere to make decisions. That'll be the biggest thing. And then deciding which sensors, how many sensors, what we want to measure, how frequently we want to measure, whether they are soil engaging, whether they are. So it's going to be an incremental process, a learning process for a lot of people, because like you mentioned, Dr. Griffin talked about the economies. The expectation is that these systems should be economical and yet productive and efficient as the systems are of today, but we will see what people can achieve in the next 5 to 10 years to get there.
But it will be happening that rapidly. We're not looking at 10, 20 years down the road, you don't think?
I don't think so. There are lots of people working hard in terms of seeing that how to create those functional systems. And I think once we get there, there'll be a lot of planning to have a system which can be commercialized and which people can use without much effort.
Remarkable possibilities. That's what makes it so fun to talk about these particular topics, AJ. We appreciate the input, as always, and we'll have you back undoubtedly soon and talk more about what's developing in precision technology.
Thank you. Thank you, Eric.
Along with us, Ajay Sharda. He's a precision agricultural engineer with K-State Research and Extension. We'll be back with more. This is Agriculture Today.
Did you eat today? Thank a farmer. A way to get more involved in agriculture is through 4-H and FFA. Through 4-H and FFA, we have been given multiple opportunities to grow as leaders and learn more about agriculture.
You can learn skills related to jobs, public speaking skills, and you get the opportunity to travel around the country and meet new people.
If you want more information about getting more involved in 4-H and FFA, visit them on their websites at kansasffa.org and kansas4h.org.
From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. I'm Britton Rucker. The Kansas section of the Society for Range Management has put on a symposium titled Rangeland Carbon Storage, A Look to the Horizon. The symposium featured speakers from diverse backgrounds discussing potential for grasslands to capture carbon. Discussing the benefits of increased soil carbon is Joel Brown from NRCS. In terms of carbon in soil, you discussed there are some competitors.
If you're trying to manage soil carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas, as well as lots of other sectors, the transportation sector, the power generation sector, and if you're trying to market carbon to or reductions in carbon to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, then we're really in a market that we have to compete with all of these other sectors. When buyers are interested in buying reductions or in greenhouse gas emissions, they don't care where they come from. They just want the most effective and the most efficient and the best price.
So what are some management practices producers can use?
Fortunately for us in managing rangeland, the management practices that we do, that we want to use to sequester the most carbon possible, are the management practices that we have long promoted for livestock performance, for wildlife habitat management, for water quality, and that is, number one, get the stocking rate right and adjust the stocking rate as necessary based on weather. So if it doesn't rain, cut the stocking rate. And we know, and especially in the Flint Hills, we have an excellent record of really good ranchers that we can observe what they do, and we know that what those sustainable stocking rates are, and we know how to adjust them. The next thing that we can do is manage for distribution. and that is make sure that we're getting animals over the whole of the pasture or the whole of the ranch, or getting them where we want them when we want them there. So controlling the way those animals use the landscape, and again, in the Flint Hills, we know how to do that very well. We can do that with spring burning, we can do that with placement of water, we can do that with some strategic decisions about fencing. These are management practices that have been around forever, but from an institutional standpoint, we've been promoting them for 125 years. The third one is land at the right season. We want those animals out there early in the growing season when the grass is most nutritious and most available. And if you get your animals out there, that's when they're going to do the best. And in general, that's kind of what works the best for the rangeland itself.
You discussed some challenges in rangeland ecosystems.
The biggest challenge that we have in rangeland, it doesn't rain when we need it to rain, or it rains too much when we don't need it. So just that weather variability is by far the biggest challenge that we have in any kind of rangeland. The other one that's a big challenge that we also, the reason that we love working with rangelands is because they themselves are variable. You take the changes or the variability in the weather and the changes or the variability in the land, and then throw all that in with the changes or the variability in the market, and you've got this really difficult set of circumstances to manage within that really constitute the biggest challenge, and always has for ranchers.
So Joel, what is the biggest opportunity on carbon on rangeland?
The biggest opportunity, I think, on carbon on rangeland is to just regard carbon not necessarily as a standalone commodity or as a standalone service, but to look at it as part of a whole array of other things, like I mentioned, water quality, livestock performance, open land, wildlife habitat. So if you include all those things in together, then managing for carbon fits right in with the rest of those things, makes sense, and they're all achievable with the same basic set of practices.
And you and I both know that it's all about an incentive game. How do you motivate people to adopt these practices?
In terms of working with ranchers in particular, I think you have to take into account that, first of all, they're in ranching. So they're motivated to do a good job. They're motivated to adopt the practices. And like I said, I think they're motivated because of all of these management practices that we're interested in are really correlated with good management for livestock production. And they focus on managing for livestock production, livestock profitability, and having, good herd management and all those things. So that really, we don't try to steer the management ship with carbon. We try to tag on to the livestock management part of it and see if we can account for the carbon in a general sense as part of a system that is really built around livestock management or ranch management.
That was Joel Brown from the NRCS. Another presenter at the 2020 Rangeland Carbon Symposium was Justin Derner from ARS, speaking on carbon sequestration, dogmata, and data. Just to begin with, what is dogmata?
Well, dogmata is the plural of dogma, and dogma by itself is defined as that opinion or belief that is out in the public, generally recognized, but often can be not supported by evidence. And so we contrasted those dogmas with prevailing data in the scientific literature to see if there was agreement or there was disagreement. We showed across a very suite of topics, given the prevailing dogma and the science, was there agreement or disagreement, and in cases where there's disagreement, why is there? Is the dogma perceived by the public as different, or is the data perhaps needing differences in terms of collection methodology?
Now, most carbon can be observed above ground, but you discussed the below ground carbon.
We're very keen on looking at the above ground carbon. We can see that in trees and plants. In the rangeland systems, it's essentially a forest upside down where more than 90% of the carbon is below ground. And so what we observe above ground is that 10% or less carbon. So there is that understanding that there's a lot of carbon below ground, and we can have management and climate influences, weather influences on the shorter term on that below ground soil carbon pool, which is large for our rangeland systems.
And you kind of touched on this, but what are some controls over carbon?
So the general controls over carbon for rangeland systems are location in terms of your climate, prevailing temperature and precipitation patterns, and soil texture. And then those are on the longer term, and those are major determinants. And then at the shorter time period, we can have changes in that related to weather, wet periods, dry periods, hot droughts, etc., and or management where we can influence, again, that smaller fraction of the carbon, which is biologically active.
In terms of carbon rates, they are lower on native rangeland and higher on formerly cropped land.
Correct. On those native rangeland systems, which have been evolved over many, many decades, we see very little change in that soil carbon over time due to management because we don't have the capacity to add much there. Contrast that with the formerly cropped lands where the tillage practices in the past had removed that carbon because of the tillage, had taken that carbon out of the soil, respired it back to the atmosphere. There's a large capacity to add carbon back in, and therefore in those systems we can use management to our advantage to recapture that carbon out of the atmosphere, store it back in the soil as soil carbon.
What are some ecosystem effects?
In terms of ecosystem effects, we're looking at systems which can be very dry, such as those desert grasslands or desert shrublands. We're looking at those systems perhaps to the western Great Plains, which are highly variable, often semi-arid, but can have wet to dry years. Contrasting that with these more mesic systems here in the east, where we can have precipitation be 4 to 5-fold higher. What we see there is across those systems, however, most of that carbon, again, is still below ground. The pool sizes in these mesic systems here in the eastern side of the Great Plains are much higher, and they're harder to change because a small change there is dwarfed or less magnified because of the inherent amount of carbon in the system to start with.
Now, in terms of management, grazing plays a big role in carbon levels in soil.
So a proper management where we have matching the stocking rate with the available forage, we can have very sustainable systems where we can show slight increases over time in this carbon sequestration. Now overgrazing, where we're intentionally degrading the system, which doesn't happen much anymore, thank goodness, but those can have negative effects up to 50% loss in some grassland systems around the world. That's where we're really modifying the system, losing soil through erosion or other processes. And again, back on those systems that are formerly cropped, we can use management through grazing, again, properly done with stocking rate and grazing time to change that plant community and increase the carbon below ground.
Now, a lot of producers will question some management practices like rotational grazing. Does that play into any factor into soil storage?
That's one of the dogma out there, is that rotational grazing on these native rangelands has the potential and should increase soil carbon storage because of the management practice. Unfortunately, the data is in disagreement there. The studies in the literature showcase that there are no discernible advantages to the grazing system. It's, again, driven by stocking rate. The caveat there is, again, on these restored systems where we're going back to formerly cropped lands, rotational grazing, where we can change the time and timing of grazing, can influence the change in plant community, alter the amount of root carbon going in that ultimately becomes soil carbon in those systems that have the capacity to add carbon back. Again, matching the amount of animals with the forage availability and understanding that grazing during the dry periods is really where we have the chance of losing carbon back to the system, and trying to be sustainable there, reducing our numbers, matching, again, the animals out there on the landscape to the forage availability, and taking advantage of those wet periods where we can see increases in carbon through not only the wet year, but also our management influencing that carbon going below ground.
A big thank you to Justin Derner from ARS, who recently presented at the 2020 Rangeland Carbon Symposium in Manhattan. I'm Britton Rucker, and this is Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.
When you are in need of timely, reliable, and trusted information, K-State Research and Extension is here. Whether it's organizing people, information, or resources, they have the necessary tools. Community comes first for K-State Research and Extension. For more information and to connect with your county's extension agents, visit www.ksre.k-state.edu.
Coming to you from the campus of Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today, and welcome back. Eric Atkinson with you. Over now to today's agricultural news page, and these headlines, courtesy in part of DTN. Well, you producers should see the third and final round of market facilitation program payments in the bank, as it were, by the end of this week. The USDA announcing that yesterday. The latest MFP payments come just weeks after the U.S. and China finalized that Phase 1 trade deal. According to the USDA, payments will be made by the Farm Service Agency through the Commodity Credit Corporation Charter Act to you producers. MFP assistance based on a single county payment rate, to remind you, that's multiplied by a farm's total plantings of MFP-eligible crops in aggregate in 2019. Those per-acre payments are not dependent on which crops were planted last year, the USDA reminds us. Producers' total payment-eligible plantings cannot exceed total 2018 plantings, and the county payment rates will range from $15 to $150 per acre, depending on the effects of trade retaliation in a particular county. Now, dairy producers who were in business as of last June the 1st will receive a per hundredweight payment on dairy margin coverage production history. Hog producers will be receiving payments based on the number of live hogs owned on a day selected by the producer between last April 1st and last May the 15th. Of course, if you've any questions about these forthcoming payments, stop over at your local FSA office and talk with the good folk there. The China coronavirus situation is expected to result in the U.S. and China undergoing consultations under the Phase 1 trade deal relative to purchase commitments of U.S. agriculture and other products under the deal. Recall consultations are called for if either party faces a delay in their purchase commitments for reasons outside of their control. Most observers expect consultations will be held between the two countries if they have not yet been via phone or video conference. Some expect delays in purchases and shipments of as long as 1 to 2 quarters, with the seasonality of China's buys of U.S. ag goods potentially impacted if the purchase timeline goes beyond that in terms of any delay. It's possible that with enough supply chain disruption, China will not be able to meet the schedule for Phase 1 purchasing commitments. And both sides in the latest glyphosate court case have now agreed to an indefinite continuance in the trial to allow settlement talks to continue, according to a spokesperson for Bayer, as told to DTN, confirming yesterday that a settlement had not been reached. The case in the 22nd Circuit Court in St. Louis was near completion and about to be turned over to the jury to decide whether glyphosate, and specifically Roundup, led to the non-Hodgkin's lymphoma suffered by the 3 plaintiffs. This is the first multi-plaintiff case and the 4th case to reach the courtroom around the carcinogenic potential of the widely used herbicide. Bayer lost all 3 previous cases and was ordered to pay tens of millions of dollars in damages. The Bayer spokesperson said this indefinite continuance is intended to provide room for the parties to continue the mediation process in good faith. Now, estimates of the number of potential plaintiffs in the U.S. are from 50 to 75,000. Media reports have put a possible overall settlement cost in the range of $8 to $12 billion. Reminding that just last week, the EPA finalized its interim registration decision on glyphosate, once again stating that the herbicide poses no risk to human health and can be used safely with certain drift mitigation requirements. Next up on Agriculture Today, our weekly feature for you dairy producers from the Animal Sciences and Industry Department at K-State, Milk Lines with K-State dairy specialist Mike Brook. Mike?
Today I want to talk to our Kansas dairy farmers about keeping their dairies in the black as we move forward into 2020 and beyond. You know, we've been through a couple of tough years, and milk checks are a little fatter than what they were, so we probably are feeling a little bit more comfortable, and it's probably easier maybe to have that farm in the black today than maybe it was 6 months or a year ago. However, I think we need to be very careful. And I think there's 4 key things that I would encourage you to do as you move forward and as you try to keep your operation in the black as we continue down this road. Number 1, I hope you're having honest discussions with your banker. And if we're having some issues with getting our farm in the black, maybe we need to start with the banker first. get some of their ideas on what we might do to change how we maybe structure some debt, or even what we're doing with our expenses or certain parts of the operation that may not be as profitable as they could be. One of the key areas you need to look at there is your heifer raising operation, and maybe for a short period of time you shouldn't be raising heifers depending on what the cash flow situation is. Second thing to remember is keep that financial belt pretty tight. Last couple of years you've probably stopped feeding maybe some feed additives, or you've done some other cost-cutting things on your dairy. There's always a temptation when that milk check starts to grow to add some of these things back in. Some of those things might be helpful in increasing the production on your farm, but others maybe won't. So make sure you consider carefully what you add back. And in thinking about that, you may still have some Band-Aids in your program. So let's fix the problems first. What kinds of things are we talking about? Well, we're talking like issues with fresh animals. You know, that first 3 weeks prior to calving and the 3 weeks after calving. A lot of times there's additives and things that we put in there to try to put a Band-Aid on a situation. Maybe we have a nutrition issue or a cow comfort issue that we need to fix. Keep in mind that sometimes those Band-Aids are there because we're not doing a very good job with forage quality for those animals. So let's fix the root of the problem, making sure that we're doing things to increase intake as well as cow comfort during those times. And then the final thing to consider is to make sure that you keep on your toes as we move forward. You know, in a free market situation, somebody always does it better. Somebody always does it cheaper. That is the true economic situation we have in the dairy industry and other parts of agriculture as well. So make sure you're keeping your focus where you need to be, and make sure you bring your A game every day to your dairy, improving those things that you can so that you can improve the financial situation on your dairy. This is Mike Brook with K-State Research and Extension, encouraging our dairies to keep an eye on the economic factors that are important to the success of their dairy.
All right, Mike, many thanks. Quick reminder here about our podcast service. Should you like to catch us at any time at your leisure, it can be found handily at agtoday.net. That's agtoday.net. And we'll return in a moment on Agriculture Today.
Did you know every Kansas farmer feeds 128-plus people?
Kansas farmers are hard workers, dependable, authentic, and sensitive.
Not only do farmers put food on your table, but they put clothes on your back and fuel in your car.
For more information about Kansas farmers, visit K-State Research and Extension online or stop by your local extension office. This message has been brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
This Agriculture Today concludes with our weekly wildlife segment. Charlie Lee joins us once more, wildlife specialist, K-State Research and Extension. Coyote problems not only in the rural areas, but in urban settings. Our topic today, Charlie, something that's been on the rise, you say. We'll talk eventually here about the approach to dealing with this called hazing. But what about these incidents of coyotes interacting with humans in urban sites?
Well, it seems to be occurring more and more frequently. We've had coyotes that live in cities throughout North and Central America. And as coyotes become accustomed to urban areas, the number of attacks on people and pets increase. Part of that is due to societal changes in human values. Historically, carnivores like coyotes were persecuted. Now they seem to be given protection and conservation, and there are many people that believe in artificially feeding coyotes in these areas. So consequently, coyotes do not fear humans, and the number of attacks increases. One report showed that in the last 45 years or so, there's been about 150 attacks in the United States and Canada. Fortunately, there's only been 2 fatalities on humans because of coyote attacks, but the number of people that are bitten certainly is increasing. It's not just unique to other parts of the country. These attacks on people occur in Kansas as well, and they seem to be getting more frequent in some cities. Just last week, I saw a report of 3 attacks by coyotes in a 1-week period in the city of Chicago. One was a small child that was taken to the hospital with significant injuries. So we know these are occurring. The question is, are there things that we can do to prevent these attacks from continuing?
That was that question, the central purpose behind this study you'll tell about today. And it looked at the approach of hazing coyotes. Now, explain what that is.
Well, in this particular study, they used a population of captive coyotes, and then they simulated scenarios between coyotes and people that occur in common urban settings. And then they applied a hazing treatment to determine how coyotes with different human experiences responded to the hazing. Now, the hazing treatments included using coins in a tin can, shaking it at the coyotes when they approached within 10 feet, stomping of the feet, and yelling. That was the approach for hazing. The scenarios of the type of interactions with coyotes and people included adults walking with a dog, adults hand-feeding coyotes, and then the children's scenarios did not include walking of a dog because of the perceived safety considerations for both the pet and the young child, but they also included the child walking and the child hand-feeding coyotes. Then the subjects walked alongside these captive coyotes that were kept in large 1-acre-sized pens. They did this for 5 weeks and video filmed the coyote interaction with the humans. They had a brief period of time where then the coyotes were not exposed to humans, and then the hazing treatments occurred. And I think it was kind of interesting in that they determined that coyotes that were hazed by the children generally spent more time avoiding the child than coyotes exposed to adults. Coyotes that had been hand-fed by adults had to be more frequently hazed than coyotes with no past experience with adults. Past experience with children surprisingly had no impact on the number of hazing events. The number of times a coyote approached an adult or child was reduced based on the cumulative number of times that the hazing occurred. So that suggests that coyotes learn to avoid behaviors that warrant hazing, and that this could be an effective non-lethal management tool. So I think that particular trial is kind of the first time someone's tried to really focus on what types of hazing can be done, and is that hazing effective on multiple groups of coyotes. There were some caveats here that I think are important to note with this particular study. It was we used paired coyotes. I remember these were captive coyotes that had human exposure before, very similar to what would have been found in most urban areas. The second caveat was that they could not control whether neighboring coyotes observed the coyotes being subject to hazing during each trial. So that might influence the results somewhat, in that there would not necessarily be enough separation between groups, and coyotes might learn from observing their neighboring coyotes. But I think it was a good approach. For the first time, they showed that the potential risks of human-coyote conflicts is going to call for some immediate action, and that most of the time hazing seems to be an important technique in reducing the number of attacks, and in this case are just simply approaches to coyotes to humans that are either walking by themselves or walking with pets, or perhaps more importantly, humans that are feeding coyotes.
So all that said, hazing may be at least a partial answer, but you would suggest that folks should take other measures to avoid conflicts with coyotes.
Yes, I usually suggest that first we stop leaving food outside, either for wildlife or more often it's done for pets like cats and dogs. Don't leave pets outside, particularly cats and small dogs. And then make sure that we try to keep wildlife wild. We don't want to get coyotes accustomed to coming up close to people, because history has shown that those interactions can lead to some negative consequences.
Those considered those thoughts. Again, this was a study looking at the effectiveness of hazing coyotes and deterring them from interacting negatively with humans, particularly in urban populations. It's an interesting topic. And Charlie, thanks for covering it with us today. Charlie Lee, Wildlife Specialist, K-State Research and Extension. Well, once again, our time is away. As always, thanks for tuning in. And for Britton Rucker, Eric Atkinson here, this has been Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.